Welcome to Hard Talk from Moscow. I'm Stephen Sacker. Over the past few days, the world has viewed with alarm the very real possibility of a direct military confrontation between the US and Russia. The focus of the tensions has been Syria, of course, where missiles have been fired, but the hostility runs much deeper. We've seen diplomatic expulsions, sanctions, and talk of a dangerous new Cold War. Well, my guest today in an exclusive interview is Russia's Foreign Minister Sergai Lavrov. What is Russia's next move? Sergai Lavrov, welcome to Hard Talk. The world was deeply alarmed last week by the prospect of a direct military confrontation between the United States and Russia. How close do you believe we came to that?
Well, I don't think that was very close. I believe it was a situation created by very reckless behavior of our Western colleagues who accused the Syrian government and thus as allies of the Syrian government in applying chemical weapons against civilians without waiting for OPCW to inspect the place. Actually, at the moment when OPCW was physically ready to move from Lebanon to Syria, they executed these strikes. As the representatives of our military explained, the deconflicting channel has been engaged all the time.
So to be clear about that, without using jargon, the US and allied forces gave you indications of how the strikes were to be carried out, and you gave them some indication that you would not retaliate?
I prefer not to get into the nitty-gritty of these military-to-military channels. There is a channel existing between the Russian and the United States military, both between the capitals and on the ground in Syria. And I believe the military discussed and continue to discuss this and other things very professionally. They understand each other, and they understand maybe better than anyone else the danger of this kind of adventure.
But Mr. Lavrov, this crisis is not over, is it?
It depends on those who invented the crisis.
Well, it's quite clear from words used by your own diplomats. Your ambassador to the United States said there would be consequences for the strikes that we saw. Vladimir Putin called it an illegal act of aggression. So the world wants to know, what is Russia going to do now?
That's a statement of fact. And consequences certainly would be, there would be consequences. We lose basically the last remnants of trust to our Western friends, who prefer to operate on the basis of very weird logic. Proof is in the punishment. They punish first, like they did in Salisbury. Then they wait for Scotland Yard to finalize the investigation. They punish first in Duma in Syria, and then they wait for the inspectors of OPCW to visit the place and to inspect. Punishment, proof by the punishment is what is being applied by the troika of Western countries.
Well, I want to talk to you about the detail of the cases you've mentioned, both in Duma and the Skripal case as well. But before we get there, I just want to continue the idea of the diplomatic relationship today. Now, the US ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, said US forces remain locked and loaded. When you hear that kind of language, how do you respond?
Well, I think that they have to put their own house together in Washington, because we understand that this kind of statements could be made either by the commander-in-chief or by the military. And as I said, the military of the United States and of the Russian Federation maintain the deconflicting channel on Syria, and this is some kind of confidential information.
You say there is no trust. You mean zero trust now between Russia and the United States?
I said we are losing the last remnants of trust, which is not yet zero.
Theresa May, British Prime Minister, Emmanuel Macron, President of France, both made it very, very clear that the intervention we saw was all about degrading and deterring the Syrian government's chemical weapons threat. It was not about an intervention in the Syrian war, and it was certainly not about regime change in Damascus. Do you accept that?
So they said.
Do you accept it?
We don't accept this. What we accept, I mean, you have hard talk, you know. We want hard facts. And highly likely is really ridiculous. And the policies of our Western friends...
Sorry, when you say highly likely, you mean the assessment that chemical weapons were used in Douma by the Assad government forces?
No, I said highly likely as a new invention of the British diplomacy to describe why they punish people. Because these people are highly likely guilty. Like in Alice in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll, when he described a trial, and when they discovered that the jury could be engaged, and the king said, let's ask the jury, and the queen shouted, no jury, sentence first, verdict afterwards. That's the logic of highly likely.
Well, that's what you say. Russia opposes the use of chemical weapons, and it believes people who use those weapons should be punished. Do you agree with that?
I thought you were much better informed about the Russian position to ask the obvious.
It's obvious. You agree, because you've signed the relevant treaties. You are part of the international commitment to ban and eliminate the use of chemical weapons.
Yes, more than that. We did eliminate our chemical weapons in 2017, which was verified by the OPCW, which was welcomed by the entire OPCW Executive Committee. And unfortunately, the United States is still to deliver on its own obligations, which they have been postponing and postponing again and again.
But if I have just stated the obvious, and it is quite clear what the Russian commitment is, then surely you must want the perpetrators of that chemical weapons attack in Douma, for which there is overwhelming evidence, to be punished.
No, wait. You are jumping the facts again.
Well, I don't think I am.
There is no proof that on the 7th of April, chemical weapons were used in Douma. Can you?
Emmanuel Macron and the French have made it quite plain. They have intercepts which show helicopter movements, Syrian government helicopter movements over Douma. They have pictures of gas canisters found at the site of the attack. They also have the record of the Syrian government over the last several years using chemical weapons. If you put all of that together, as far as the French, the Americans, the British...
I cannot be impolite to the heads of other states. And of course I cannot be impolite to the head of my state. But you quoted the leaders of France and UK and the United States. And frankly speaking, all the evidence which they quoted was based on the media reports and on social networks. The canisters, I saw this picture, a canister lying on a bed, and the bed is intact, and the window glass is not broken. Look, you need to be a bit more serious. Can you explain to me why strike the day before OPCW is going to move there and to verify the fact which they assert was a fact?
The American representative of the OPCW, the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, says there is a deep concern that Russia has tampered with the evidence sites in Douma. Can you guarantee Russia has not tampered with them?
Well, yes, I can guarantee. But before you know, it's like it's absolutely the same as was the logic of Theresa May on Salisbury. When we asked dozens of questions, when we requested common investigation, when we requested our presence at the sample taking ceremony, if you wish, she said, no, we are not going to answer any question until Russia answers all our questions. The only question which was addressed to Russia, tell us how you did it. Was it ordered by Putin, the poisoning of this poor couple, or this was the result of you losing your control over chemical arsenals. It's I believe, for any intelligent person, it's a situation which is absolutely obvious.
I'll get back to the Skripals.
Back to Duma.
Yes, you have claimed that the event in Duma, first of all, didn't happen. Then the message seemed to change, and you said there was some sort of event, but it was stage managed and fabricated by what you called a Russophobic country.
The event did not take place. What did take place was the staged thing. It did not involve any chemical weapons.
And you believe Britain was behind the staging of a mock chemical weapons attack in Duma? Yes?
It's up to the history, knows some experience during previous decades. What we do believe, and the special services, of course, can present information to the British colleagues.
Well, you say there's irrefutable proof that it was faked, it was staged. You claim the white helmet humanitarian first responders were involved. Where is this irrefutable proof?
Well, the irrefutable proof is in the visiting of the place. And
where's your irrefutable proof that the white helmets backed by the British government have faked the whole thing?
What I did say was that the white helmets are known to work only on the territories controlled by the opposition, including Jabhat al-Nusra. And the white helmets are known to be ringing the bell 1 year ago in Han Sheikhun, which was a fake from the beginning to the end. And the white helmets are known to be financed, among other countries, by the United Kingdom.
But Foreign Minister, that doesn't represent irrefutable proof at all.
Wait a second. Irrefutable proof of what?
You said you had irrefutable proof that a Russophobic country, by which you meant Britain, had worked with these white helmets to fake and stage manage.
Why did you say that I meant Britain? Don't put your words into my mouth. I did say a country which is trying to lead the Russophobic campaign. Please quote me correctly. So, speaking of irrefutable facts, the Duma event was agreed to be investigated by OPCW inspectors. They moved to Lebanon. They were told by the Syrian government that they would be immediately issued visas as they come to the border. 7 hours later, the Duma and the Syrian territory was struck. What is the reason for going that way 1 day before the inspectors were about to arrive there?
The US is pushing for a new UN security resolution today, which they believe is needed to send the international signal that Assad cannot be allowed to do this again. Will you work with the United States at the UN?
If you mean that they want to resume an investigating mechanism which is not transparent, which is not independent, and which takes decisions on a sentence itself without a verdict from the Security Council, then no, we cannot accept this.
You won't accept it.
By the way, and if you know what I think, please, 1 second, Stephen. I believe that the entire reason for this resolution is to make it look that if Russia and Syria agree to cooperate, which is impossible because of the substance, but what they want to do is to make it look that we and Syria were bombed into negotiations. That's why in that resolution they insist that Syrian government must not negotiate. They forget that the main opposition group, which they all support, the so-called Riyadh group, Nasser Hariri recently, the leader of this group, stated that the United States must continue to use force not just in case of some chemical episodes, but against the Syrian government wherever and whenever the Syrian government opposes the opposition.
And what is Russia's endgame? I see you're sending more military material and men into the Syria conflict. Is it your commitment now to back Assad all the way till he controls every inch of Syrian territory?
No, it's to protect the Syrian Arab Republic from aggression, which was launched on the 14th of April, and which the 3 countries say that they would continue.
Are you going to send this latest sophisticated S-300 anti-aircraft missile to President Assad in Syria? Because if you are, the Israelis are going to be gravely concerned.
President Putin addressed this issue, and he clearly reminded that a few years ago, at the request of our partners, we decided not to supply S-300s to Syria. Now that this outrageous act of aggression was undertaken by the US, France, and UK, we might think how to make sure that the Syrian state is protected.
To be clear, you're saying that what has happened in the last few days makes you reconsider and feel positive about sending those very sophisticated anti-aircraft missiles to Syria?
It makes us convinced that whatever is required to help the Syrian army to deter aggression, we would be ready to consider.
I want to briefly turn to the case of Sergai and Yulia Skripal, who were poisoned in Salisbury in the south of England. In this interview, you've told me that credibility is important, that trust is important. You are the Russian foreign minister. You claim that the Skripal attack was mounted by British intelligence services who you, perhaps jokingly, I don't know, said are known for their license to kill. Do you expect that claim to be taken seriously?
Look, when we were told that there is no other credible explanation but to assume that it was Russia which highly likely poisoned Skripals, we said that there are other credible explanations.
Have you got one shred of evidence to suggest British intelligence tried to kill Sergei Skripal?
Well, you know, there is an old Roman criteria, who is to benefit? And I believe the UK is grossly benefiting from the provocations both in Syria and in the United Kingdom itself.
But hang on a minute,
and
Foreign
Britain
Minister.
is back on the stage of world politics,
but Russia,
in a very negative, in a very aggressive, in a very weird way.
There's a deep inconsistency in your position, if I may say so, Foreign Minister. In this interview, you've been at pains to tell me Russia is utterly committed to all of the international commitments and conventions on chemical weapons,
Absolutely.
including supporting the work of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons.
Absolutely.
You know better than I that the OPCW has run tests in 4 different labs on the nerve agent used in Salisbury. All of them have concluded that that was a Novichok agent in a highly pure form as described by the British government.
And that's the problem. That's the problem. First, the A234 agent in highly pure form, in high concentration, is already raises suspicions. Because this...
It came from Russia. It's quite clear it came from the former Soviet Union. You invented that particular nerve agent.
Look, Stephen, you're not factual. You're maybe hard talking, but you're not listening. This chemical substance indeed was invented in the Soviet Union. Then one of the inventors fled to the United States and made the formula public. And if you want to check before raising the issue, please do so. The United States patented this formula. And it was formally taken by the United States Special Services or the Army, I don't remember. But 8234 is a very light, I mean, it acts it seriously damages a person, kills him or her. But it evaporates very fast. And the sample taken 2 weeks after the event cannot, according by our scientists, to contain very high concentration.
I guess it's all a question of credibility. What you're telling me may be credible in Russia. It's certainly not credible around the world. You know, you've had more than 100 diplomats expelled from more than 20 countries. It's clear where the consensus lies. Russia is seen as culpable.
Okay, if you want to finish the issue of the substance, on Saturday we presented a paper which contains literally the conclusion of the Swiss laboratory in the city of Spitz, which was one of the 4 laboratories, which did say that there was traces of A234 very high concentration, but they also said that
Either
there was...
you trust the OPCW or you don't. It's quite simple. It seems you're now saying you don't trust the OPCW.
For a Brit, you have very bad manners. The Swiss laboratory report also said that, and in the first place, they found BZ, which was, I think, invented in the United States in 1955 and was used by it was among the equipment of the US and UK Army. And we asked OPCW, whom we trust, whether this is true or not. That in addition to A234, there was also BZ discovered. And we are waiting a reply from OPCW, whom of course we trust, but we want trust and verify.
The US Treasury Secretary is due to announce another raft of sanctions against Russian companies and individuals who are deemed to have contacts with the Syrian military. There are already, over the past few weeks, new sanctions from the United States on a whole bunch of different companies of individuals which have hit the Russian stock market very badly. Russia's being squeezed.
Thank you for your sympathy, but don't worry, we will survive. And it's not
stock market down 10%, ruble down against the dollar.
It's not just these threats to punish those who keep contacts with the Syrian government. It's a threat, which is we see, to punish the entire Russian people for making wrong choice during the elections. When they say that we would never target the Russian men and women, we would only target the oligarchs, the politicians, the military who disturb the world, they are lying. Because their desire, as I see it, is to make thousands and dozens and thousands and hundreds of thousands of Russians disturbed. Those who have been employed.
But that is Russia's vulnerability. You may have an arsenal of nuclear weapons that President Putin boasts about, and in fact he says that they're the most potent and powerful in the world today. But you have an economy which is weak and vulnerable.
True, and we know this. But this economy has sustained quite a lot, beginning from World War II, and I can assure you that the government and the president are very much keen, to make sure that the necessary reforms are taken through. And this was the essence of the first half of the presidential message to the parliament. And his second part, when he informed his audience about the new weapons delivered in Russia, he ended by saying, we always are ready to talk, provided the talk is respectful and based on the looking for balance of interest.
And a final thought. The Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, said the other day, the Cold War is back with a vengeance, but also with a difference, because now the safeguards to manage the risk of escalation are no longer present. That is a truly frightening thought. You've been Foreign Minister for 13 years. Is this the most scary time that you have lived through?
The safeguards, one of the safeguards is having normal channels. The channels between us and UK have been closed by the British, with all agencies fighting against terrorism. Between the military, it was dropped long ago by the initiative of London. NATO-Russia Council, which was a very useful mechanism to promote confidence and transparency, was closed for all practical purposes by NATO, who only wants to discuss Ukraine in that body. And the European Union closed all the avenues of cooperation with Russia, except talking to us on Syria and on.
But do you feel you're in a new Cold War?
Well, I think it's worse.
Worse.
Because during the Cold War there were channels of communication, and there was no obsession with Russophobia, which looks like genocide by sanctions.
Sergei Lavrov, we're out of time, but I thank you very much for being on Hard Talk.